Hello, I'm Hayley Wright. I'm a researcher of London poverty, and I'm also proud to be a trustee of the Historic Towns Trust. In case you haven't heard of us, the Trust is a charity which produces detailed maps and atlases of historic towns and cities. Here is just a small sample of some of the historical maps we've created in collaboration with local historians, geographers, and archaeologists. I know some of my colleagues are going to be talking about the Trust's work in more detail, but now I'm going to focus on how you might go about researching 18th and 19th century poverty through local records and maps. This is a topic that many family historians and genealogists will have encountered, and it can be difficult to know where to start when it comes to learning more about our poor ancestors' lives and circumstances. A good place to start is with a map. If you have a rough idea of where your ancestor lived, looking at a general map of the area can give clues about its affluence. For example, here we have the Historic Towns Trust's map of Tudor London at about 1520. And if we look closer, we can see examples of religious and livery company almshouses dotted around the city. A high concentration of almshouses in a particular area may suggest that the people living and working there were not particularly well off. But that's not all. Maps can also give us the knowledge we need in order to make discoveries in the local archives. How? Bear with me. The Old Poor Law of 1601 was introduced under Elizabeth I and directed that poor relief, as it was known, was to be formally administered by each individual parish. This meant that each parish had to elect an official called an overseer to give either outdoor or indoor relief to the parishioners they deemed deserving of help. Outdoor relief could be disseminated in the form of cash payments, clothing, and supplies, while indoor relief was so called because paupers would enter the parish workhouse. Therefore, records were kept at the parish level, so knowing which one you need to explore is key to finding the correct records, and it might not be immediately obvious. This is a section of a map created from London's Bills of Mortality in 1831. Crucially, it shows all the parish boundaries and clearly labels each one, which could be invaluable when figuring out which archive to visit or which poor law union you need to look up if you're researching an ancestor after 1834. But once you've found your archive, what exactly are you looking for? Well, there are several different types of poor law record, but most surviving records tend to be from the 18th and 19th centuries. And as you might expect, they are patchy. The ones you might find most useful if you're looking for a specific person are pensioner records and workhouse records. My own historical research is centred around the parish of East Smithfield in London, and here are two extracts from an entry in the weekly pension book. In the top extract, you can see that Charles and Hannah Colley were an older married couple who were receiving a pension before Charles died. At this point, Hannah likely entered the workhouse unable to fend for herself. In the bottom extract, we can see that from the 29th of April 1812, Charles and Hannah were receiving 3 shillings a week, then 4 shillings, and finally 2 shillings before Charles died. The overseer has also written how the couple obtained settlement in East Smithfield. The settlement laws were important because they dictated that only paupers who were deemed to be settled in the parish could possibly receive relief. Overseers would routinely conduct what they called examinations in order to determine who was truly settled in the parish, and these records can also be very useful for finding out more about a particular person, because the pauper would have to give an autobiographical account of their life and movements in order to prove that they were settled. Here we can see the examination of Mary Springer, who is asking for relief because she believes that her husband has deserted her. And it's actually pretty amazing the amount of information we can find out from this document alone. First of all, we can see that Mary is illiterate because she's signed her name with an X. We learn that she's married to a man called Levi Springer, and from the date, we can work out that they've been married for 2.5 years. They also have a 1-year-old daughter called Hannah. We learn that Levi has lived in the parish for the past 5 years, renting a house for 5 shillings per week. But perhaps the most interesting part of this examination is the description of Levi. Here, the overseer writes that Levi was a shoemaker, about 36 years of age, tall, originally from America, and crucially, that he was not white. The overseer even records that Levi has a natural hairstyle. Observing how attitudes have changed over the years and how some have remained pretty much the same is one of the most fascinating things about looking at these records. Because not only are we receiving factual information about people who lived over 200 years ago, but we're also getting a picture of what was important to them purely from what they chose to record and how they chose to record it. On that subject, take a look at this section of John Roke's London map of 1746. Immediately to the right of the Tower of London, along the riverside, we have the neighbouring parishes of St Catherine's and East Smithfield, the location of my research. If you look carefully, you can spot various street names in this area, such as Little Tower Hill, Flemish Street, Red Cross Street, Burr Street, Swan Alley, Butcher Row, Angel Court, and King Henry Yard. Now fast forward to about 1825, and you can see that we're looking at Thomas Telford's plans for St Catherine's Docks overlaid on a map of the parishes of St Catherine's and East Smithfield. Clearly, if these docks were to be built, the area we can see on that map would have to have been completely demolished. Spoiler alert, this is exactly what happened. St Catherine's Dock was completed in 1828 and was designed to capitalise on the expiring trading privileges of the London dock companies. In doing so, at least 1,250 houses were demolished and over 11,000 people were evicted from their homes. But could there have been another reason why the government was so keen to essentially flatten this area of London? If we look closely, we can see all the same street names that were on John Roke's map. But this one is far more detailed and displays two street names that stand out. Maybe you've already spotted them. One is Dark Entry, and the other is Cat's Hole. If you didn't know it before, you might guess that this area contained what were then considered to be some of the poorest, dirtiest, and most dangerous neighbourhoods in London. So what became of East Smithfield, and did the government succeed in turning the area around? In order to answer that question, we need to fast forward to 1898 and meet this man, Charles Booth. Booth was a successful international businessman and social reformer who devised and funded what the London School of Economics describes as one of the most comprehensive and scientific social surveys of London life that had then been undertaken. The final edition of Life and Labour of the People in London ran to 17 volumes, and as part of his survey, Booth produced the striking maps descriptive of London poverty, in which the streets were individually colour-coded to indicate the relative levels of poverty and wealth. These maps were based on the observations of investigators accompanying policemen on their beats around the city. If we look at the legend, we can see that Booth categorised the London streets into 7 levels of affluence, ranging from upper class and wealthy in the orange, right down to those he deemed to be needy to the point of criminality in the black. This particular section shows St Catherine's Docks and the surrounding area, and we can see that the streets are marked as poor, with a moderate family earning between 18 and 21 shillings per week. Although far from being wealthy, it seems that the lawless slums so described in the 1820s have gone. But what happened to the thousands of people who were displaced when the docks were built? Only the parish records can begin to answer that. And in the case of East Smithfield, I can tell you that the overseers came to rely on what were known as pauper farms or poor farms when the workhouse was demolished. The parish accounts state that their spending on farms increased from £2 in 1826 to £240 by 1830. These farms were run for profit in various parts of the city by private contractors, and conditions inside were often far worse than the workhouse. So I guess the question is more, who benefited from the docks and was sacrificing the inhabitants of St Catherine's and East Smithfield a price that should have been paid? Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for, but I hope I've inspired you to go and look at the maps and records of a local area that interests you. And I also hope you'll go and check out the great work of the Historic Towns Trust. Thanks for listening.